listener production.
Hey, Sasha Barber-Gatt with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Netflix has dropped its limited series on the rise and fall of Aussie wellness influencer Belle Gibson. In the early 2010s, she convinced the world she had cured her terminal brain cancer holistically, a story that led to her becoming wildly popular and scored her a number of lucrative deals. But it all came crashing down when a close friend exposed her lie.
And I did go there having 1% of me thinking, gosh, what if I have this all wrong? Like, obviously no one wants to question someone who's basically dying of cancer, this young single mother who's just adored by so many people.
That chat with Belle Gibson's former friend turned whistleblower on how she realised it was all a lie and what she thinks of the depiction of her story in Netflix's newest show, Apple Cider Vinegar, is coming up in the second half of this episode. But first, time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Thursday, the 13th of February.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. A warning, this story speaks to some pretty abhorrent anti-Semitic behaviour in the community. 2 city nurses will likely be charged over a video in which they spoke about killing and refusing to treat Israeli patients.
Let's say an Israeli, God forbid.
I won't treat them. I'll kill them.
Okay, you have no idea how many Israeli dog came to this hospital and I sent him to Jahannam. I literally sent him to Jahannam.
That was Ahmed Rashad Nadir and Sarah Abu Lebdeh, health workers at Bankstown Hospital in Sydney's southwest, speaking with Israeli influencer Max Vifer on the anonymous online video chat platform Chat Roulette. It's understood the pair were on night shift when the conversation was filmed and were wearing their New South Wales health uniforms. The video was released by Vifer, with New South Wales Police now in contact with him to provide the full unedited clip.
Lebdeh and Nadir were swiftly stood down yesterday, with Strike Force Pearl set up to investigate anti-Semitic hate crimes in New South Wales, now investigating and looking to lay charges. The New South Wales Health Minister has vowed the pair will never work in the state's health system again, while the New South Wales Health Secretary, Susan Pearce, was close to tears when speaking about the incident yesterday.
Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be standing here with 2 staff of the New South Wales health system having said such horrendous things.
The Prime Minister also spoke about it on the floor of Parliament.
They should face the full force of the law.
Police and New South Wales Health are also investigating whether the threats the pair made had any implications on the treatment of patients. They've seized CCTV footage and have been interviewing hospital staff at Bankstown Hospital.
As to the reaction from the 2 nurses, well, a relative of the woman spoke to reporters outside her house, saying she was inside having a panic attack before a lawyer formally issued no comment. A legal rep for Nadir says he has offered a sincere apology to Vifer and the wider Jewish community.
Yeah, so this reaction, from the tears of the New South Wales Health Secretary to the comments we heard from Anthony Albanese in Canberra showed just how seriously this is being taken. And I think it's amid this backdrop of this string of anti-Semitic incidents that we've seen happen right across the country. And it is amid this growing concern as well that the racist behaviour is increasing within the community.
Evidence has wrapped and all witnesses have been cross-examined in the unfair dismissal case launched by our friend and colleague Antoinette Lattouf against the ABC. The federal court hearing yesterday from Antoinette's line manager, Elizabeth Green, that there was pressure from higher up in the public broadcaster to get rid of her. Pressure, she says, started on day 1 of Antoinette's 5-day stint on ABC Radio Sydney. It was 3 days into that cover in December 2023 that Antoinette was taken off air after sharing a Human Rights Watch post accusing Israel of using starvation as a tool of war, a post Green told the court yesterday she saw nothing wrong with.
The ABC's head of audio, Ben Latimer, also took to the stand yesterday, saying he didn't think Antoinette had breached the broadcaster's policies or procedures by reposting the video. However, he explained his primary concern was whether she had failed to comply with the direction to not post anything about the Israel-Gaza war during her week-long stint, which is a key defence being argued by the ABC in this case. Now, this comes after Ida Buttrose earlier in the week was made to explain her involvement in the case. Correspondence between her and the the outgoing managing director, David Anderson, reading, "Has Antoinette been replaced? I'm over getting emails about her." That was from Buttrose. When pressed, the former chair denied having any involvement in Antoinette's removal, telling the court, quote, "If I wanted somebody removed, I would be franker than that."
Antoinette is arguing the ABC bowed to pressure from pro-Israeli lobbyists in removing her and that she was terminated for reasons including her political opinion and race. The ABC denies sacking her, claiming she was employed and paid for the full 5 days and was simply not required to present the final 2 programs.
And we also heard from Antoinette last night. She put out her first statement since proceedings began last week, and she posted to Instagram saying, "I feel the immense pressure and weight of this process, but your kind messages of support buoy me. I'm both moved and thankful." So we send our love to Antoinette. Yeah. Now, while the evidence has finished and wrapped up, the case will return to court at the end of this month, and that's when closing submissions from both sides will be made before the judge goes away to consider his verdict.
Australia's second largest lender has become the latest of the big 4 banks to cut its interest rates. Just days before the RBA's February meeting, Westpac has slashed its short-term fixed rates by 0.4% for owner-occupiers and 0.35% for investors. It comes a week after NAB slashed its short-term fixed rates, 0.25 for owner-occupiers and 0.3 for investors. According to CanStar, Westpac's move makes it the lowest advertised fixed loan provider out of the big 4 banks, their lowest rate available sitting at 5.59%. But the financial comparison site says the move is unlikely to push many borrowers into fixing, with the bulk of Australians still sticking to their variable rate options when it comes to home loans.
Yeah, so this is interesting because we know the RBA is meeting on Tuesday. It is the first meeting of the year, and why that particular meeting is being watched so closely is because there is hope, then this is another signal that it could happen, that the RBA is going to cut the official cash rate. Now, that has been sitting stagnant since November of 2023. It stayed the same all last year amid the cost of living crisis when people are doing it really tough and they just want some relief when it comes to paying their mortgage. So this will definitely buoy the hopes of economists and, people who have mortgages. They want it to be cheaper. So we'll see what happens next Tuesday. And who needs governments to build stuff when you've got a team of beavers?
Nice beaver.
Thank you. I just had it stuffed.
Jokes aside, that's the lesson that's been learnt by officials in the Czech Republic after a colony of 8 beavers managed to finish a dam project that had stalled. So planning had been underway for 7 years to return a section of the Birdie Mountain region to its natural state when the critters moved in and completed the task in 2 days and in almost the exact same spots that had been planned. And the project's managers say it saved them almost $2 million Australian dollars or 30 million Czech crowns. Ecologists who have been tasked with inspecting these dams say they will last a long time and create great conditions for the rare stone crayfish, frogs and other species that thrive on the wetlands.
Oh, I love this story so much. That is so fun.
It's just amazing. And, I think people are learning, well, we've known for a long time how amazing beavers are, the work that they can do, but there's been a couple of cases in recent years where the ingenuity of beavers has been on full display. In Oregon, in the US, they built dams on the property of a large stormwater treatment facility, and scientists discovered that the animal structures were able to filter out heavy metals and other pollutants twice as effectively as the human-built structures, which is amazing. And in 2023, California actually introduced a beaver-assisted restoration program so that the animals could create a healthy ecosystem for other animals, replenish groundwater, and even provide wildfire protection. See, we humans come in, we think we can do it better. Mother Nature, she knows what she's doing. All I'm saying, leave the beavers be. Thanks, Chris. Next up, it is your deep dive with Belle Gibson's former friend who blew the whistle on her. Really excited to hear this one. Stay tuned. That's coming up next.
Remember this train wreck 60 Minutes interview from a decade ago?
I mean, 2009 was a really bad year for you, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. You had 3 heart operations. You suffered 2 cardiac arrests. You died twice on the operating table. You had a stroke. And you were diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumour and given 4 months to live.
Correct.
That was Belle Gibson, an early adopter of Instagram and one of Australia's OG wellness influencers. In the 2010s, she rose to internet fame after claiming she had healed her terminal brain cancer through healthy eating and alternative therapies after abandoning chemo. Belle amassed over 200,000 followers on Instagram, a big deal 10 years ago, launched a recipe and wellness app called The Whole Pantry, and had been crowned Elle magazine's most inspiring woman, as well as Cosmopolitan's fun, fearless female. Her app shot to #1 in Apple's food and drink category, seeing her flown out to Silicon Valley for the launch of the first ever Apple Watch in 2014. It was there that the Whole Pantry was chosen to feature on every single Apple Watch around the globe.
It took 7 months worth of development. I put everything that I knew along my journey with cancer, nutrition and wellness, and put it on the most accessible device possible, the iPhone. And it's just onwards and upwards from there with the Apple Watch. They're spotting it. The text messages and the Instagram comments and the tweets are coming in saying, did we just spot your icon on the new Apple Watch? And you did. And it's exciting.
She also scored a major publishing deal with Penguin, turning The Whole Pantry into a cookbook that hit Australian shelves the same year. There was just one teeny tiny problem. Belle Gibson never had cancer. By 2017, she was a convicted fraudster whose app and book had sensationally been pulled from stores, all as she owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and more to the charities that never saw a single cent of what she had promised them. Now, Belle Gibson's rise and fall is being told in a 6-part limited Netflix series. It's called Apple Cider Vinegar, and it's being marketed as a true-ish story based on a lie, with audiences and internet sleuths struggling to figure out the truth from the fiction. Joining me now is someone who was friends with the real Belle Gibson, and their friendship is actually depicted in the series. Chanel McCauliffe first met Belle in 2013 as an intern writer for an online publication, tasked with writing a puff piece about her. They soon after became friends, and less than 18 months later, she had exposed Belle as a con artist who never had cancer. Chanel, welcome to The Briefing. As I've just said, you were friends with the real Belle Gibson. How accurate, in your opinion, is Netflix's portrayal of her?
Yeah, the portrayal of Belle in the show is obviously a dramatisation. In real life, Belle actually wasn't as manic and hyperactive day to day as depicted in the show. She was actually, very warm and softly spoken sometimes, even shy. So there's probably that slight difference in the personality of the character.
Yeah, I guess if we take the series as gospel, Belle had the gift of the gab and she knew when to pull the brain cancer card to get what she wanted. Is that how she managed to fool the world?
Yes, obviously, as we know now, it was a strategy for her, and it was obviously quite calculated. What I experienced and witnessed with Belle, it was obviously kind of a business strategy in a way to make money, because as soon as she started making that money, her lifestyle changed quite dramatically. She would also latch on to other people that were unwell. She actually did it with my partner at the time, who had a traumatic brain injury, and she very quickly formed a close bond with him and then claimed that she had a traumatic brain injury as a result of her brain tumour. And so she would leverage that relationship to learn about his symptoms to then take them on as her own, which she did with a lot of people, which was also the case with a little boy she met who actually did have brain cancer. She really took advantage of him and his family, fundraising on behalf of them to get the boy potentially life-saving surgery and never handed over the money.
Yeah, which is a scene and, a storyline that features in the series. And I guess something that you've touched on there is that money played a bit of a factor in motivating Belle Gibson, and that's something that's definitely reflected in Apple Cider Vinegar. But we also get this impression of an attention-starved young woman who's longing for community. Would you say that's accurate?
I have heard this narrative about Belle wanting to be accepted and wanting to be a part of a community, which we all do. We all want to be connected with people. We all want to feel accepted. However, Belle could have joined a book club or a sporting team and not inserted herself in vulnerable communities, which she has done multiple times. This is actually a pattern for her. She hasn't done it just with cancer. She's done it in her past as well. There also is this narrative that Belle was very naive and this kind of snowballed and got away from her and she was in too deep. When I confronted Belle and found out that she was lying, I actually urged her many times to come forward and tell the truth and actually be able to do it on her own terms. And I said I would support her and help her with that fallout. So Belle was actually made very aware of how serious the nature was of what she was doing. And at that point, you know, she actually wasn't that naive anymore to the consequences and how serious it was that she was doing. So from what I experienced, she wasn't that naive in that case.
Yeah, let's talk now about you featuring in the series. Your character is portrayed in the show and you're depicted as Belle's manager and someone who helped her promote her wellness empire. But that wasn't actually who you were to Belle in real life, was it?
No, that's right. I didn't work for Belle. I was a close friend of Belle's. I did help her in different things, personally and professionally, just where I could, you know, as most friends would do, help each other out. The depiction of me also being Mila's manager, who's Mila is another character in the show, which is based on a real person called Jess Ainscoe, that I was her manager as well, is not accurate. But as we did see in the show, I did help Belle by preparing meals for her to pass on to that little boy with cancer and his family, which she didn't do. So little things like that I would help with.
At the height of it all, which is kind of when you became friends with Belle, was she as influential as the show suggests, to the point that people were actually refusing traditional medicine because of the messages and the things that she was posting on social media?
Yes, she was extremely influential at the time. She amassed a huge following through social media, through her book, through the app, raising money for charities, and people were making very serious decisions about their life and their health. And I personally know people that did stop conventional treatment to follow her wellness and natural protocol to try and attempt to heal themselves naturally. So this is how dangerous her message was and how grave the misinformation was that she was spreading. Some of the other consequences that she had an impact with was obviously these huge companies in the world like Penguin Books and Apple, who just completely fell for her lies and did zero due diligence. And then they were a part of spreading her misinformation. Like they had no responsibility to their communities and to society to protect the world from her as well, because they were going to profit from it. So there was an agenda there.
I want to return now to that quote-unquote intervention scene. That's a major plot point in the series, and it is something that actually happened in real life. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you remember of the actual moment back in 2014 that you did confront Belle?
That night was actually, just a really crazy night. And I did go there having 1% of me thinking, gosh, what if I have this all wrong? Like, obviously no one wants to question someone who's basically dying of cancer, this young single mother who's just adored by so many people. So there was a part of me that was naturally questioning myself. However, through that night, it just confirmed everything, my gut instincts, that it was all a lie. So when I arrived there, sat her down, and I just straight out said to her, "Are you sick? Do you have cancer?" And she was immediately defensive, saying, "Of course I do." And I basically demanded for her to go get any evidence, any medical reports, diagnosis, oncologist reports, anything that she could produce to prove that she had cancer. She said that she didn't keep any of that paperwork because it was negative energy in her house. She had just announced her cancer was stage 4. It had just progressed all through her body, through her blood, uterus, spleen, and this was basically a death sentence diagnosis. So I said to her, "Where did you get that diagnosis? What major hospital in Melbourne?" She said she didn't go to a hospital. Some doctor came to her house and picked her up, took her to his practice or his home and gave her the diagnosis. And I said, who was that doctor? And she responded, Dr. Phil, which just seemed really, you know, it wasn't a comical situation, but that just seemed so comical at that point. What is actually not shown in the show or very widely reported is that Belle also phoned her acupuncturist and requested that he come over. When he arrived, she said, okay, tell them that I have cancer. This was kind of her get out of jail free card, right? So she said, look, tell them I have cancer. And he said, of course you have cancer. And I said, well, how do you know that she has cancer? And he said, because she told me. So
wow.
As firm as I was that night and how seriously I was taking it and demanding answers, I did make it very clear to Belle that I was there as her friend. And as I say in the show, I did say to her, this is your inner circle knocking at your door. This is where it starts and this is where it can end. And you need to come forward and tell the truth, and I will support you and help you with that. And had she done that, things could have played out very differently for her. She could have made things right. She could have provided accountability and closure for her victims and the charities she ripped off.
What led to that reaching a point of confrontation? What were the red flags that were being, flown in the air that you thought, enough is enough?
Well, one of the biggest things was Belle was never sick. Or she never appeared to be sick. She was actually the glowing picture of health, beautiful, lush, long hair, beautiful glowing skin. She was always energized. She was flying around the world, building this empire. That was a huge red flag. It was one time or a couple of times went to the solarium, which is obviously a risk of skin cancer. So that seemed very odd to me. We went out drinking one night and she was ordering shots and drinking excessively. And I said to her, should you be doing this? This is obviously not good for you. It's not aligned with this natural wellness protocol you're following. She said, well, I'm going to die anyway, so might as well have some fun. And then the other huge thing was at her son's 4th birthday party, she faked a seizure. Obviously, at the time, I couldn't know for sure she was faking it, but in the middle of the birthday party, children everywhere, she all of a sudden collapsed to the floor, and it was quite a violent seizure. She was convulsing, saliva coming out of her mouth. Went for a really long time, about 40 minutes. And about halfway through, I said, I'm going to call an ambulance. And all of a sudden she came to and came out of the seizure and said, no, don't call an ambulance. I don't want Western medicine involved. And obviously we know why. And I left the birthday party that day just with this sick feeling in my stomach and feeling like there was something really performative about the seizure. And that's when I really started to piece all of the pieces of the puzzle together and realize this is not all adding up.
Yeah, and the way that the narrative kind of follows, which is true to form in a way, you then set out on this path to become Belle Gibson's whistleblower. But your path to doing that and kind of exposing her story wasn't as easy as you thought, right?
No, it was very challenging. I first went to the police to report her. The police said I had no evidence, which I didn't. I then went to quite a high-profile lawyer, and he personally knew someone very closely, a young woman who did have cancer. And so he actually said, this is quite an awful thing that you're doing. I can't imagine someone accusing my friend of this. So what you're doing is basically slander and defamation, which was extremely disheartening and discouraging. I then went to Australia's top investigative journalist at the time. He hadn't heard of Belle. He said he might look into it, he might not, and I never heard back from him. So this ended up being over a course of weeks and ended up being months where I was exhausting what I felt was like all avenues possible. I then was turning to friends and family, extended networks to see where else I could go, who I could get to believe me. And eventually it was my former boss who went to the editor at The Age and kind of vouched for me and said, this is a really credible person and I believe her. And so it was the editor at The Age that went to some journalists, Bo Donnelly and Nick Toscano, who published the book, The Woman Who Fooled the World, which the Netflix show is based on.
Yeah, well, they ended up publishing a pretty big expose in March of 2015, and then subsequent stories started to follow, and everything started to unravel for Belle Gibson. Now that it's been made into a Netflix series, it's been slated as a true-ish telling of her story. How do you feel about that label?
I mean, yes, it's not an accurate depiction of the real story. I'm not sure why they needed to distort the truth as much as they did, because the real story is actually so crazy enough. I don't entirely feel comfortable with the glamorization of her story. There's a lot of unethical things I don't necessarily feel comfortable about. I know that obviously Miller's character, who I mentioned, is based on a real person, Jess Ainscough, who did have cancer and who was healing herself naturally. Now, she did make her story public and she was a public figure. So obviously, you know, you're able to retell that story. However, they kind of villainized her in a way. And I knew Jess. I wasn't close friends with her, but she was a very sweet, beautiful person who thought she was doing the right thing for her and her family. And this must be very traumatizing for her family to see this, especially how they have villainized her in a way. I also think it's quite an unoriginal, stereotypical, cliche narrative to pit two women against each other in a rivalry, in a bitchy way, competing against each other. That wasn't the real case in real life. I think it's ironic that the show is telling a story of how bad it is that someone financially took advantage of people with cancer for that very show to then profit from that harm that was caused to those people with cancer.
Well, as for Netflix's part in all of this, they said, you know, the series is important to continue a conversation about the dark side of the wellness industry. Do you think Belle Gibson is the vessel for that conversation in 2025?
Look, there are some really important core messages in this story that people can learn from, not just following anything you read or see online or that someone is saying online, to do your own research and make the best decision for yourself. And look, Belle has almost had a public stoning in a way. There has been a pile-on in the media and the media and the world can't let go of this story. In some way for good reason. What she did was very dangerous and we shouldn't forget the lessons that we can learn from that. However, at the end of the day, I personally find it difficult to forgive Belle Gibson. However, she is human. She is still a young woman. It's difficult that she hasn't taken a lot of accountability and provided closure, but I do hope Belle can find a way to learn and grow from this and maybe be able to provide that accountability one day. But I think there still should be some responsibility and ethics in how we tell this story.
I do want to touch on something that you mentioned there, the idea that Belle's influence essentially now has evaporated. She's not publicly influencing people in the way that she once was. Some of the commentary around this show is that it's dredging up a story from a decade ago, essentially, and now putting it on the global stage. Do you think Belle and her family deserve for this story just to somewhat go away?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and that's something I've been giving a lot of thought to, that I've been reflecting on and even second guessing, you know, my role in speaking about this story now. This also must be very difficult for Belle's family to relive. And yes, I think perhaps there should come a point where potentially Belle is able to find a way to move forward with her life.
Chanel, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
That was Chanel McAuliffe speaking with me there. And if you want to catch the documentary she's in, it's called Instagram's Worst Con Artist, and it'll be available on Netflix from next Thursday, the 20th of February. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. Maybe someone who downloaded The Whole Pantry back in the day or is just obsessed with the story of Belle Gibson. It's a really easy way you can support us and all that we do here at The Briefing. So is sharing our social posts. You can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. And don't forget, we'll be back in your feed with another deep dive this afternoon from 3 p.m. But until then, I'm Chris Spiru. Catch you next time.
Listener.